Western Balkan countries rely heavily on coal and other fossil fuels for heat and power. This not only contributes to global warming, it compromises air quality and affects health. In addition, current unsustainable wood extraction rates put mature forests at risk. Governments and industry want to make energy more sustainable, introducing renewable energy sources such as wind, solar, hydro, and biomass to meet their climate goals and increase energy security while keeping people employed. In Serbia alone, some 1.6 million hectares of agricultural and mining land are degraded or abandoned. Here, fast-growing perennial bioenergy crops, such as willow, poplar, or reeds, can be grown sustainably for biomass. These plantations can grow for 25 years and are harvested every other year. The initial investments typically pay off after 5 years. Bioenergy crop plantations will be established with agroforestry borders and forest conservation areas to restore degraded land, regenerate soils, increase biodiversity, protect forests, improve water and air quality, sequester carbon, and create job opportunities. 75,000 hectares of bioenergy plantations could replace 10% of the current coal-based electricity production in Serbia. Windmills and solar panels can be combined with bioenergy crops on degraded land to further increase the share of renewables. Bioenergy crop plantations are work-intensive. This is great news. A large number of permanent green jobs will be created for miners and farmers, both directly and from innovative uses of the crops in packaging, pharma, and fodder. A green and just transition away from coal is within reach. Join us and our partners in supporting a green and just transition in the Western Balkans.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and to all of you who are online. Welcome to this really exciting session. We thought it was time to put some energy into the GLF, and so here we are. I'm really excited about this session because, as you've seen in the film, we have, I think, the potential for a very real energy alternative, one that could usher in a green growth and green alternative to coal. I am particularly thankful to my colleagues from Resilient Landscapes who have brilliantly brought us together, to the colleagues from E3I who are the main proponents of this, my colleagues from C4ICRAF who have brought in the science, and above all, our Serbian counterparts and partners. Also present today and in this exciting lineup are people who are really invested in these concepts, such as our first speaker today, and I will call him up shortly, Mr. Satya Tripathi, the Secretary General of the Global Alliance for a Sustainable Planet, but others here in this exciting lineup who are bringing experience from finance, from science, and from action to this agenda. So I don't want to take too much time. Today we're just going to run through, we have a number of exciting speakers, and they will follow one after the other. So I would ask that as you listen here in the room, and above all, those of you online, that you collect your questions, use the chat to register them, because we do want to listen to you. We want to hear from you at the end of the session, when we will have some time for question and answer. So without further ado, Satya, could you please come up?
Thank you, Ravi. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I'm particularly excited about being here because this is a journey that goes back several years, and it's a partnership with the World Agroforestry Center that we established in 2016, which then led to the establishment of the Tropical Landscapes Finance Facility, which ICRAF so ably hosted. And that produced the world's first private finance at scale investment in protecting a 400,000 hectare forest landscape. And now that we have the hindsight of 5 years, we know that it worked. Nothing is perfect. So of course, things could have been done better. The results could be even much better. But the point is that there were no examples to draw from at that scale. And it was the first and still remains one of the world's best examples of what is possible with the power of virtuous partnerships. And I think that's what I want to be speaking about, the possibility, the power of possibilities, the power of bringing ideas together, the power of bringing institutions together, the power of bringing champions together. Because that's what is going to get us out of the mess we are in. I don't want to spend too much time talking about the science. You all know about it, that we are in a very bad place. If you have read the UNEP emissions gap report, the flagship report that comes out every year, you know that whatever is being promised makes us hopeful, the net zero by whatever years different countries are promising. But what they're putting in writing is scary, because what they're put in writing is that we will get to collectively, as a planet, we'll get to 7.5% emissions reduction by 2030, whereas based on what we promised, or we keep promising, we need to reduce our emissions by 55% by 2030. So that's the reality, and that's scary. And that's why the people in this room, those that have the power of possibility to harness and produce the results, we need to do maybe 10 times more than what we have been doing, because that's what will get us out of the mess we are in. And then, of course, in our arrogance, we keep talking about the planet needs saving. The planet doesn't need saving. We need saving, just our species. And of course, the millions of species that will take down with us if things don't improve. So it'll all be on us. Let me stop there and talk about Serbia. I go back a long time in Serbia. More than 20 years ago, I was a part of the solution. I was heading the Human Rights Investigation Office, almost 1,000 people drawn from all parts of the world. And what I saw was, of course, there was great despair and great damage, great devastation, but great hope. And when you meet the people there, and I'm not talking about one community or the other, the common people are just wonderful human beings. They have suffered a lot. And of course, it's been 2 decades since then. But the peace dividend needs to appear. And this is a great opportunity for us to bring prosperity, to bring economic growth, to bring environmental sustainability and prosperity at the bottom of the pyramid for people that have suffered a lot in that region. And so for that reason, what our friends at E3 International are doing, our friends at C4 ICRAF are doing, and of course the Austrian Development Agency, I'm so grateful that they stepped forward to support this. And I sincerely hope that there will be many more. We have here, and you'll be listening from someone who I considered a great champion of the cause, Craig Kogut, the founder and chairman of Pegasus Capital, but also the person that has brought together a certain level of scale and support to building private finance-led funds supported or blended with Green Climate Fund capital, both the Subnational Climate Fund, the Global Fund on Coral Reefs, and many more to come. So his presence here clearly signals that we are on a good track, and it is people like him that we need to. He needs no convincing, but there are many more that might need convincing. That here is a tremendous opportunity. There are millions of hectares of degraded land across the Western Balkans. And that can all become a tremendous opportunity, not just for people, not just for planet, but also for biodiversity, but also for the general environment and the ecosystems that really need to be brought back, rejuvenated, revived in a way that befits that beautiful region. It's, if you've been there, if you've spent time, and I spent 5 years there. So if you spend time there, you would know what I'm talking about. It is one of the most beautiful places on earth, undone by a lot of people that were not really working for their people. And I know this because I was responsible for investigating 12,000 human rights violations. At that time, I was running that whole operation. But that speaks to the fact that we have a tremendous opportunity to undo. You can't take away the suffering that people had, but you can certainly present a better face of humanity through our work, through our support to people in that region. And for that, I am so grateful to Ravi and Bonnie and everybody else for organizing this session to put a spotlight on the work that is happening there. Thank you all very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Satya. Please stay in the room because we are going to come back to you during the question and answer session. It's my great pleasure to invite Bonnie Norman, President of E3I, and she'll speak more to the specifics, I believe, of this. So Bonnie, over to you.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to follow you, Satya. You were really the inspiration for our work in the Western Balkans. As I learned in December 2018 of the success of the Tropical Landscape Finance Facility Climate Finance Day in Paris, and said to you, I think we can do the same thing in the Western Balkans. And so together, our tremendous team has been working on bioenergy done right. And that is in the context of a landscape approach. But first, I want to share with you these plants we're very, very excited about. Because instead of burning down the forests, which are already at a very high extraction rate, our focus is growing sustainable bioenergy crops, energy willow for heat and power, and reedy arundo for biogas. And if you look at the slide, see these little sticks? We put about a 6-inch long willow rod in the ground. And over the course of one growing season, it can get to 2 meters. So you'll see people standing in later slides next to crops that have just been planted this season. These plants are planted once, they grow for 25 years. They have remarkable phytoremediation properties, meaning they draw the toxins and pollutants out of the soil and into the root ball. They sequester carbon, and they can be burned very effectively at 50% greater heat value than coal lignite, which is commonly used in the region, with much lower SOx, NOx, and other particulate contaminants. And in fact, the technologies are improving to contain those as well. So we're excited about that and the potential to co-locate, as you see in the pictures, with other renewable energy technologies to create a bankable and scalable investment. So I wanted to share with you the context that you did hear already, the forests under pressure, the terrible air pollution that we're seeing very often, especially during heating season in the Western Balkans, the 1.6 million hectares of abandoned and degraded land. And that was from a UNDP study in 2016, and that focused on really the abandoned and degraded agricultural lands. Our project is focused more broadly also on coal mining areas, on landfill areas, and other degraded lands. So we feel pretty comfortable with that number. But the number we need to make a real difference is really a fraction of that, 5%, perhaps a little bit more. And in what we're doing, we really think that context matters, as I've just shared with you in the Western Balkans, and all of those factors coming together. Approach matters, which is a landscape approach, which we're doing in partnership with C4ECRAF, which is our key partner. And the enabling environment and partners is important. But let's step back for a moment and say that we're not just focusing on bioenergy crops. We're focusing on not a monoculture, but agroforestry borders to promote biodiversity and other value chains around those fields. We're also focusing on permanent tree areas to be restored. So a percentage, not on agricultural land, but where those would be best suited. So the idea is to take a holistic landscape integrated approach to create a bankable investment, but also profound environmental restoration, which increasingly has investable value. And so I look to Craig later to share with us some thoughts on that. And finally, in terms of partners, enabling environment for scale is key. You have to be able to aggregate land, use it for a long period, and hopefully in bigger chunks so it's efficient. So initially we were focused on the small holders, and that's still part of our plan. It's a key part of our plan, bringing rural economic development to the region as a whole. But the second part is really looking at who are the large landholders now who can jumpstart this biomass, sustainable biomass market. And those are the national electric companies, the district heating companies, the pellet producers, the biogas producers, who while they're focused on agricultural waste, need a crop that can provide the base load. And so that crop is our Redia Rundo. So let's, not changing, here we go. So just let's speak for a minute about the finance facility, because I think we want to get into how this is a bankable, scalable investment. And when we look at this, at the top, you'll see adapted solutions to different settings, which I just referred to, the landfill areas, the mining areas. But within that is the solution that we're seeing, this integrated solution, co-located with wind, hydro, and geothermal, or whatever would make sense in that context. And what you'll see is value chain development from the off-takers, which are all a little bit different, very similar. So I think we can do bankable tracts of investable land at large scale, but we'll have a little bit of nuance, and we're sensitive to that. And this slide is way too complicated for the short time I have here, but I think what it touches on at the beginning is the role of different actors. We have the development finance institutions. You'll see the grant and donor component, which we've been so fortunate to have already, the support of the Austrian Development Agency, and on the just transition, working with Olaf Palme in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Those together will work with the commercial banks, creating on lending and providing also concessional capital, because what we do face is a 2-year period with our bioenergy crops, or even a 3-year period with no revenue. So that is going to be a huge challenge. We put the crops in the ground, they grow substantially. We cut them after year 1, so they grow even more substantially. And at the end of the 3rd growing season, we start our cycle of harvesting every other year. And we believe we can do this with a very substantial return on investment, break even around between year 5 and 6, but basically throwing off a lot of cash from years 5 through 25. And that's because there's not a lot of maintenance involved. There's some, but it's just, it's a very good business case. But getting through that initial period of no revenue, where you need a subsidy or where you need some kind of development guarantee, some kind of blended finance mechanism is going to be key to this. So you'll see we involve a lot of different players. There will be an asset manager coordinating all of the resources. And down below, you see the people we're really working with, the farm cooperatives, the various investments, and the key players, which I've mentioned before. So without going on any longer, there's a landscape component that we want to get into, and the impacts, as well as the science-based approach, which will make this all hold together. And should I pass the baton or turn to you, Ravi?
In this case, so thank you very much, Bonnie. And could I ask the panelists to please take their seats up here? And we would then go straight into the panel discussion. Chris, where? Yeah, you can do that from here. Yeah, So please take your seat. Yeah, we have some of our panelists are here in the room, and some of the panelists are virtual. And I'm going to start off by asking Dr. Chris Martius to speak. And after that, we will have, and I hope I get the names right, Anis Kazagic, the Chief Strategic Development Officer of EPBIH in Bosnia-Herzegovina. Then Violeta will speak, Jovanovic, Executive Director of the National Alliance for Local Economic Development, NALED. Then Branko Glavonic of the University of Belgrade. Craig is here and will speak. And Lena, you get the last word before we get to question and answer. So, Chris.
Thank you, Ravi. And just to follow up on what Bonnie said, we want to get a little bit more into the landscapes approach with a little bit more of detail. And that's what you see on this slide. This is basically showing our vision if you go from the current landscape to the bottom picture here, you see the change we intend to initiate. And this graph is modeled on the Vojvodina region in the north of Serbia, which is basically a flat agricultural area. Not many trees. It's actually one of the lowest tree densities in the whole of Europe. And so, as you can see in the bottom picture, but okay, thank you. As you can see in the bottom picture, we are going to introduce, that's the plan, the energy crops, but also the agroforestry borders around them to increase diversity and to bring in additional product that people can harvest and sell or use and consume, and also forest restoration areas. So the landscape as a whole gets more diverse and probably more productive and more healthy again. And even for the monocultures, the energy crops, we're going to have, as Bonnie said, a 2-year cycle. So they will grow for 2 years and they will be cut above ground. The roots will stay and they will. The trees will come back, or the bushes will come back in the next year. So basically, we keep, so to say, half an ecosystem. Above ground, there is a harvest, but below ground, there is soil organic matter, roots, and of course, all kinds of diversity will be maintained in the soil. So, and that's also the idea, to refurbish the land with this process. There's a lot of degraded land, as you heard. And we think after 25 years of having the system, you could go back to food production on the same piece of land, and then maybe rotate the crops, the energy crops across the landscape in a way. So this is the idea, and we are coming in particularly with the science input here. I'm talking about C4ECRAF here, bringing in the experience from the Global South, where we do a lot of this kind of restoration, but of course also drawing on experience from Europe, where willow is grown all over the continent, and where we actually get the best varieties for the region. And we need to optimize a lot. We need to look at water use, land preparation, water use, fertilization, harvest methods, and so on. So we're going to optimize this in the best possible way. And then it will be very important also to capture the success of this, both in environmental terms and also in social and governance terms. So we are looking to develop the right indicators for this, and then of course become involved in the monitoring and evaluation of the plantations, because we want to know what comes out of it and how can we optimize it. In the longer future, we think also there might be some digitalization opportunities, precision agriculture and things like that. But this is probably in the moment a little bit too much looking into the future, I would say, for the moment. So Bonnie already said there are 1.6 million hectares of degraded land. We think we just need 75,000 of that to replace 10% of the current coal-powered electricity. And we know that with current boilers, up to 20% of biomass could be co-fired with coal immediately. So that would immediately reduce the emissions that come from the coal, of all the stuff that is actually not so healthy. And plus it represents more or less 1/3 of the intention, at least in Serbia, of the government to double the share of renewables by 2030. So currently they have 20% of renewables, and they want to go to 40%. So 1/3 of this could come from biomass, which shows you that biomass is a contribution, but it's not going to be the only solution. We're thinking of an integrated system, as you have seen, we think that the biomass particularly can replace the coal in one function that it has in the current system, that is providing a steady base load of energy supply, because wind and solar are weather dependent, daylight dependent, and so on. But the coal currently provides this ballasting of the system, providing a steady provision of energy, and biomass could play that role in the future. There's also a role for biogas, and so the reeds we are planting are actually going to this into this line of energy. And so, as this is very labor intensive, at least more labor intensive than putting up a solar or wind turbine and then basically it runs on its own, we think that is a good opportunity to provide thousands of new green jobs, and these jobs are needed for a fair transition from coal mining to renewables. And so that's very important in the regional context, because people don't want to nobody wants to be unemployed, and so we think that is a real important argument in favor of bioenergy. And again, the bioenergy will be planted on land that is very often not being used currently. It's mine land, it's degraded agricultural land. As I said before, this is just one picture here from the flatlands in the Vojvodina, but we're also thinking of course, doing this on mine land that has been mined, and also in the mountain areas of Serbia, Bosnia-Herzegovina, and maybe in the future other countries like Macedonia or Croatia. So the approach can be the same. It has to be adapted, but it can be the same. And of course, the overall landscape approach with the agroforestry and the tree plantations might cover at the end, plus the short rotation plantations might cover at the end some 100,000 hectares. That's at least our plan for probably a 10-year period. And we are going to develop these bioeconomic value chains, post-harvest, selling, processing, and so on, that also are going to create jobs. And just to conclude, so through this initiative, we think we can make gains on a lot of capital, not only natural capital and social capital, but also financial and political. We are providing this sustainable renewable energy. This is an investment, as Bonnie said, after 5 years, it should be paying off those investing. We are bringing in the green jobs, we are bringing the rural development, and the effects will be improved air quality, restored land, restored water and biodiversity, and protecting mature forests. And on these pictures, you see our plantations from this year. Basically, we're having demonstration days in the field, and we were very, very happy to see that the big electricity and power companies are on board with us on this, as you can see in those pictures. And so we think this has a good potential. Thank you very much.
We will momentarily go to the speakers online. We're just queuing them up. So take a moment to digest what you've heard before we go. Welcome. I guess it's Anes. Over to you, please.
Hello to everybody, and thank you for inviting me and to have opportunity to say few things and few words on behalf of power utility of Bosnia and Herzegovina, Elektroprivreda, which is involved in this SLAY project of bioenergy crops. Our company has its own decarbonization roadmap, which we follow already a few years. And we have developed and launched many projects from three main pillars. First pillar is the installation of renewable energy projects, mostly hydro, solar, and wind. Then second pillar is increasing of energy efficiency. And the third pillar is the involvement and the introducing of biofuels in our coal-based thermal power plants in order to cut CO2 emissions and decarbonize our electricity and heat sector. What is very important to emphasize that our thermal power plants deliver not only power, that is electricity, then also heat for three big cities in Tuzla coal region and in Zenica coal region. Two cities in Tuzla coal region which are fed by the heat from our cogeneration power plants are Tuzla city and Lukavac city. And in Zenica coal region, it is the municipality of Kakan. Those three cities have a 250,000 people living there, and they are all fed with the heat from district heating systems fed by heat from our cogeneration units. We are aware that it is a modern way of providing the heat, but we are also aware that we need to decarbonize production of the power and heat. That's why we started our projects of bioenergy. We actually started 10 years ago with biomass co-firing on our cogeneration power plant Kakan, and it was a waste woody biomass supplied on a sustainable way from waste from industry, waste wood from the industry. Then we wanted also to develop some other sort of the biomass, and last year we mapped all our area of our coal mines in order to investigate which area can be used for installation different sorts of renewable energy sources, but also including plantation of bioenergy crops. So we found about 200 hectares convenient for installation of photovoltaic power plants on our former coal mines area. And we already have 5 projects in preparation phase, and we can expect in the next few years all those projects on the grid. But also we found some about more than 600 hectares convenient for plantation of bioenergy crops. We have already tested on lab scale the mixing of our coals and woody waste biomass, but also energy crops in order to investigate if it is possible to use the energy crops with our coal in our thermal power plants, and we found that it is possible. Then we had the lucky that we met the persons from E3 International. We had in communication last year, and in the beginning of this year, we signed the agreement with them and started together to develop the projects of bioenergy plantations on our coal mines. So only in a couple of months, we already established our first tests plantations on our 2 coal mines on Kreka and Breza. It is 2 hectares of plantations, and we now have a plan for the next year to install the next 20 hectares of bioenergy crops plantations. It is actually short plantation copies below, but also we have a plan in the next years to multiply these plantations for a couple of 100 hectares. And that's we would already need some access to the dedicated fund to be supported to launch such a great project. We believe in this project. We believe that bioenergy plantations have a double positive effects to the climate change mitigation. First, as a carbon sink, and then by using the biomass from those plantations, we can switch and replace the coal in our coal-based power plants.
Thank you very much for that. And we are now going to Violeta Jovanovic, Executive Director of NALED. Violeta, please go ahead. I see you on a beautiful beach somewhere or the other.
Yeah, thank you. This is Belgrade calling. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Greetings to all of you and especially to colleagues in the region. We're very privileged to be here, and I'd like to thank our colleagues at E3 for inviting us to participate. And in the introductory word, I'd just like to present NALED briefly, because we are somewhat unique as an organization. We are public-private, and we're a membership organization which gathers local governments, businesses, and experts from the NGO sector who work jointly on improvement of business environment. And we specifically focus on environment as the single biggest priority according to our members, whom we surveyed in our annual assembly meeting this year. And they said that all projects and initiatives related to environment should be the focus of NALED, for a good reason, obviously. So I'm really thankful to you all for inviting us and for giving us the opportunity to present the perspective of NALED when it comes to the topic. And in preparing for the panel, I looked up through our analysis, and we do hundreds of those annually. And we actually did one in 2012 when it comes to degraded and abandoned land. We looked at one of the regions in Serbia, Eastern Serbia, which is getting empty because many of the people are leaving, and many of our people left even in the 80s and 90s for the Scandinavian countries from this area. And there is a lot of land that is degraded and totally abandoned. And it turned out that more than 50% of this land is totally untaxed and invisible to the government. In what NALED does, we always think of ways how to position topics that are either in the eye of the public or outside of it, how to position them when it comes to the government. And one of the ways to their attention is definitely the budget and the taxes. And it turned out that this land is totally invisible and untaxed, which is a big loss for these communities economy-wise and also financially, because it's not getting taxed, and no one is paying any of the dues for the land. And the people are also thinking of how they could make use of this land. So all that E3 is doing is in Serbia could be expanded to the benefit not only of the country, but also of its people, especially in these areas that are getting empty. And this is what we wanted to focus in our presentation today, in our discussion, is for NALED to be involved jointly with E3 to look at the regulatory framework, because this is where we are at our best to do the needed analysis. And this is where we'd like to partner with colleagues in the panel, especially the University of Belgrade and its professors, to do the relevant analysis and look at the data, and then come up with a policy plan on one end, what needs to be changed in terms of land management policies across the country, and especially in areas which are getting abandoned. And then to look at the financial plan that also someone mentioned, how to bring value back to these areas by including them in the taxation plan, which is important from the perspective of the government, and in the funding plan to help people who want to do something with the land that they own so that they can make it useful again and hopefully profitable. So this is the perspective where NALED can get involved, and we're looking at project opportunities to develop such a plan with E3, at least through a pilot program, and then to expand it, because we do a lot when it comes to agricultural land. However, still not from this perspective. We did a lot when it comes to reparceling land, which is a huge issue in Serbia still, because people have small plots, and this is a challenge for them because they'd like to grow those plots bigger or get rid of the small plots. And this is what the government is trying to do, but it's a long-term process and it doesn't pay off politically quickly, which is usually the essence. So we do reparceling of the land, and we did a lot when it comes to legislation regarding agricultural land and farm households. However, in terms of environment, we mostly work in the area of waste management so far, in terms of improving waste management in the area of recyclables, food waste, batteries, electrical waste. This is what we do at the most, and we'd like to do more with E3 when it comes to using degraded land for the sake of all of us. Living in Belgrade, I'm also very much aware of the effect of the district heating and pollution of air, land, and environment. So from this perspective also, we'd like to do more with E3 to contribute to the goals that Serbia and Europe and the world set for 2030 and beyond. And to be able to meet those targets, we would all need to do more together. And that's why now these investing efforts to work with colleagues across the region, Western Balkans and beyond. And I'd like to connect with all the colleagues in the panel and to make sure that we extend this relationship further for the benefit of environment and all of the communities in the Western Balkans. So whatever we can do together, I would heartily support it and applaud E3 for taking the initiative to bring us together in the panel and to have the leadership to introduce such innovative projects that can bring so many benefits for all of us.
Thank you very much, Violeta. Thank you, Violeta. Yeah. Thank you. So can we go straight to Branko, who I see is ready? Branko, please, the floor is yours.
Yeah. Thank you. Big greetings from Belgrade from my side. It's my great pleasure to participate in today's panel, having the opportunity to present to you the current situation regarding renewable energy in Serbia and the importance that energy crops could have in increasing the share of energy from renewable sources in the future. I will start with the gross final energy consumption. In Serbia, the gross final energy consumption in 2020 was about 9.5 million tons of oil equivalent. The share of energy from renewable sources in that consumption was about 1.9 million tons oil equivalent, which was about 20.3%. Serbia's national target for 2020 was 27%. In order to reach the target of 27%, it is necessary to reach the level of about 2.6 million tons of oil equivalent from renewable sources in the total final energy consumption, or about 0.7 million tons of oil equivalent more than is currently the case. This amount can be distributed to all renewable sources. Many of them require high investment cost, especially wind. Therefore, the most realistic option is to increase the share of energy from biomass. The share of biomass in the consumption of energy from renewable sources is about 1.17 million tons of oil equivalent, or about 61%. This shows that biomass is still the most important source of renewable energy in Serbia. At the same time, I'd like to mention that the existing potentials of biomass from forestry are used almost close to their maximum, and an additional increase of biomass production for energy needs is almost impossible, because the principle of sustainable use of existing forest will be jeopardized. So where is the solution when it comes to increasing the use of energy from biomass? The solution is energy crops, and that option is realistic and feasible in Serbia. Why is this the most realistic option? First, it can be realized in a shorter time compared to wind and solar. Second, Serbia has the potential of degraded or abandoned land in the amount of about 1.6 million hectares, which can be used to raise energy crops and increase the production and use of energy from biomass. Third, the first pilot energy crop projects have shown good results. We continue to develop these projects with a realistic prospect of success, working together with the key institutions and decision makers. If the entire amount of missing energy from renewable sources of 0.7 million tons of oil equivalent were produced only from biomass from energy crops, it would require an area of about 55,000 hectares for the establishment of energy crops. This area of abundant land exists and represent less than 5% of the total available abundant land in Serbia. So the potentials for establishing energy crops for biomass production exist, and they are realistic. In order for them to be put into the function of biomass production, it is necessary to secure appropriate conditions on the sphere of consumption. If the government measures to encourage the consumption of biomass in industry, electricity production, public and commercial facilities, then it can be expected that energy crops will become one of the most important sources of biomass for energy needs in the future. Practically, energy crops would become Serbian oil. We are working intensively on this with decision makers, and we expect that appropriate solutions in the new energy strategy of Serbia will create a starting point for the accelerated development of energy crops in Serbia. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much for those excellent and thoughtful remarks. So with that, we return here to the physical space, and I can assure all of you who've been listening online or speaking online that people here have been listening in rapt silence. So with that, Craig Kogut, Chairman Pegasus Capital, may I present the floor to you, and I hope you can use your time to wow us completely.
Well, I don't know if I will wow you, but I was wowed by the presence, very seriously, by the excitement with the other panelists that have already presented online, but with what you showed, with Bonnie's initial slides. They really speak to themselves. I mean, and as an investor, but quickly, and I'll explain why, and I think I'll maybe explain some of the challenges, which Bonnie asked me before to do. We've been investing at Pegasus in climate change, and so we used to talk resource scarcity and energy volatility. Our investors weren't quite ready for words back in 2000, like climate change. Now we can say it. We've invested both institutional capital and personal capital, and we've increasingly been focusing not just as we had in the past as private equity investors in the United States and North America, but much more broadly, as well as in particular in more emerging economies. We're the largest US private asset manager accredited by the Green Climate Fund. Satya alluded, my dear friend Satya, to some of the pioneering work we've done in blended finance. I'll talk a little about that because that relates to risk perception, which is highly relevant here. But one of the areas we have invested in, both in Canada, the United States, I'm looking at some of my colleagues who will correct me if I'm leaving something out, but Canada, the United States, Peru, as well as in Africa, has been in the area of biofuels of various forms, biomass, biodiesel, other ways to use whether trees or crops. And we love the area. That's why we've invested and we've done very well with it. One of the other importances of particularly what's going on here was alluded to, the multiple benefits. Nature-based solutions, we all know, is very much a theme of this COP. My good friend, Satya Tripathi, is a pioneer in this area. Natural capital in creating biodiversity, human health, the multiple benefits to the environment besides just dealing with climate change are apparent. And I think a number of speakers, again, in your slides, Bonnie, you touched on that. So we're very excited about that. And it is an growing investor theme, although I will tell you most investors still are trying to figure out what that means. And there's a little clarity coming on this in COP, and folks like IUCN, who's a partner in some of what we do, are trying to set standards for it. But to your point, will people value it? I think ultimately we will get added value put on things like biodiversity and the like. Just one quick anecdote. I invested personally about 12 years ago in a country at war now in Eastern Africa, and we planted 10 million jatropha trees. And those were not to cut down, but to use for biodiesel, because I don't know if those of you are familiar with jatropha, but it basically grows fruit, nuts, essentially, which can be put, among other things, into turning into biodiesel. And the project, what we thought would take 5 years, took 3 years. Apart from the benefit, and this was not on so much degraded land as denuded land from overgrazing and from cutting down for firewood, but what was remarkable to me, and it was thrilling to see the before and after pictures, but was what it did to the ecosystem, which we hadn't fully understood in terms of water retention, in terms of wildlife coming back, and literally creating micro ecological regions where rainfall happened, where it hadn't. I mean, I remember one farmer who was 75 years old telling me, I hadn't seen rain since I was 1 or 2 years, 3 years old, 4 years old. So the opportunity to have the multiple health biodiversity benefits with a project like this are immense. Okay, that's the good news. And I think, and I think this overall is amazingly good news. And your slide, Bonnie, when you talked about bankability, I'll touch on that. That's key. But part of bankability is scalability, which was also on the slide. Investors don't want very small projects. If we're going to attract institutional capital, and it's better to have scale. And I think that having a certain size project today will make it much easier to attract capital. And I think the partnerships that you're talking about and the capacity are also crucial. And that's all the folks around this table panel. So what are the challenges? to getting a bankable project, assuming you have the right team in the place? Well, you actually sort of had a key word there. What's the offtake? So one huge issue for us, our investors, and whether, as Branko was just talking about, knowing the government has put help with regulation or the utilities step up, as investors, what we're going to look for is offtake. And that's number one. And you can maybe bridge that some, but that's number one. And it should be doable. And the more of it you get done in advance, obviously, the better. The second is knowing that the crops will grow, which is both science and assurance from the folks you're getting the crops from. Some of it you can do just with due diligence. We also use technical assistance grants a lot, which are concessional in what we do. And I'll come back to blended finance in a little more detail in a second. And the third aspect, which I think is a big part of this when you talk about agriculture, is insurance. And Satya and I were having a discussion the other night about where we're heading. No one should insure anything unless we start addressing things. We're not quite at that point yet, but I think insurance for an investor with crops here, average crops here will take 3 years, 4 years to, but you're cutting them in a year. That's going to be a big, the risk of climate, what's going to happen. So I think that's something, and then that's an economic number, and working, you can solve that. I think if you put all those things together, you have a bankable project, which, subject to looking at the numbers, we'd stand up and say, we want to finance. So particularly given all these multiple benefits, one of the issues with investors, which is why we are using blended financing with what we do, is there still is a perception of risk in new technologies, and particularly in markets that are not as established. You look at solar, it may be easier. And again, I look at solar and it's great. We need it. We need wind, but it doesn't have the multiple benefits that you have here. But solar is easier to finance, large scale solar. It just is, particularly in a relatively newer market like Serbia. So the structures like what we have with the Green Climate Fund, whereby they provide concessional capital, which helps our investors. And there are other funds like us. I think we're one of the pioneers in it. There are funds like ours, which essentially with junior capital coming, which can help de-risk situations, should get incredibly excited about these projects. But I will say there is still a risk perception that it doesn't relate to reality. And that's just unfortunate. That's going to change over time. Again, the solar plants are easy. Planting crops for power is in another place outside the US is harder. So I want to leave you all with, I'm very excited about this project. Again, we want to see the numbers. So that's the best thing I could say.
Thanks, Craig. And definitely to be continued during the question and answer session, I'm sure. But you set this up beautifully, particularly for Lena, who has to speak to now the challenge of scale. And hopefully she will answer some of your concerns about scale, not just of scaling up the production, but scaling up the offtake, which I think we heard Ines, for instance, talking about right at the beginning. So Lena, over to you.
Thank you very much. I might not answer all your questions about the risks and everything, but I can tell you from our experience working with the people in the region and with different stakeholders on all levels, that this is a good moment for the investors to start working with us. It might not happen today, tomorrow, in a month, in a year, but definitely this is a very good and bankable project that needs investment and that will benefit the investors. But I would just like to go back just briefly as not the only representative of the Balkan region here, but it's only very few people here in Glasgow from the Balkan region, just to remind you why we are doing all of this and why this project, regardless to how many risks it has or it doesn't have, why is it important now and here? 16 coal power plants in the Western Balkan region are polluting as much as 250 units of the same power producing in the EU countries. This is why we are here. And if the risks are there, we will come up with the guarantee facilities to de-risk your capital. but this is why we are here. For decades, politicians were using the carbon, the coal, to keep political peace, to make sure that they secure lots of jobs and that they guarantee good economies, but based on the low prices of the electricity. This all needs to be changed now. And this project is addressing all of these issues. The fact that in this moment, we have managed to get on board big power companies, which are very conservative companies and very hard to make into any kind of a transition, tells me that we are on the right path. Just by getting the big power companies allocate their land in thousands of hectares that they need to recultivate, that they need to use for the benefit of the future work, is enough at this stage. We have excellent cooperation, and Mr. Kazagic is just one of the champions that we have all around the region in these companies and within the governments of the Western Balkan countries. We have to understand that these governments and these countries just came, as Satya says, out of the war. It was 20 years ago, but it is just out of the war because the war is sometimes extended on a different way, not in physical terms. So our countries are struggling with many political issues. They're struggling with poverty. They're struggling with migrations. We have lots of migrants there. They're struggling with COVID these days. And we cannot expect them to undertake the energy transition just by themselves. We are aware that the big investors are not getting into the regions that are risky. And by any analysis, you might consider the Balkan risky region. But at the same time, you can, if you look at it from the other standpoint, consider it a very prospective investment region because we are in this particular moment in time where the Balkan region can just take advantage of what was not done in the previous years, because the battle for climate will be in the Balkan, it will be in India, it will be in South Africa, it will be in China, in all the countries that didn't do their homework before, and that while all the developed countries were working on energy issues, energy efficiency, renewable energies, we were lacking behind. We were dealing with our own little things and our kids' sicknesses or whatever you call them. But now we can, with the help of the big investors and with the project such as this one, which is really bankable project from any angle you look at it, we can make it happen. One more thing that is extremely important and that we are also, that was as such seen also, not just by us, but by many other partners that we are working on, by the governments and by the power companies, are the destinies of the miners. We have thousands and thousands of miners who need to find new jobs. And if we want to tell big companies, stop using coal and start using biomass crops, bioenergy crops, start using wind, start using solar, we need to enable this process and we need to enable this transition, and it needs to be just. We are in the region already on this project in cooperation with the power companies, working with Olof Palme Institute on getting the miners on board even at this stage, which means that we will not have to fight the miners. It means that the miners will be on the same side. And that makes the investment much easier. So I want to assure you that we did our homework well in the past 2 years. Fine-tuning needs to be done, and I'm sure that from what I'm hearing and the coalition of these finance ministers that are getting together now in COP, things in that finance world will be moving, and there will be guarantees fund available to enable this investment to happen pretty soon, because we believe that the urgency is there. And the urgency is there. So we have one of the solutions. Thank you.
Thank you, Lena. Thank you also for your passion in presenting that. Satya, may I ask you to join the panel up here? We're going to go to question and answer session. My colleagues in the technical team will flash up questions that have come from folks online. And here in the room, if you have a question, please do raise your hand. I'm going to start. This was a deal that we made beforehand. I'm going to start with Craig, because you've had the opportunity now. You threw out some challenges, and I think Lena started to answer those challenges. Clearly, there is a need, and the stars seem to be aligning. I would like you to speak to the risk and how you might think and lay out a path for these folks to get over the risk, so that investors such as you, who are willing to take risks, might feel inclined to step forward. And you did suggest to me that I needed to challenge you to ask you, why the heck were you here in the first place? So why are you here, Craig, if you're not willing to take risks?
I think we are here to take risks, and we recognize the need precisely that's in areas like India, like Serbia, the Balkans. I had dinner with a bunch of senators last night from America, and a big part of the discussion was we can do whatever we want. I mean, climate change, I say often, like COVID doesn't know boundaries. Climate change doesn't know boundaries. It's in our interest as citizens of America, citizens of other countries, citizens of the world. We have to work together, including to finance opportunities, challenges in the Balkans and elsewhere. We need to. It's for our own good. And I think when you look at, in particular, why are we here to take risks? When you have degraded land sitting there, which you can essentially acquire or invest in for next to nothing as part of this transaction, I'm assuming, and you can produce, as one of your colleagues, one of the panelists said, I prefer not to say green oil, so I'll just say green gold. If you can produce green gold and deal with the horrors of the numbers are staggering of the coal pollution you have, and get all the health benefits, it has to make sense. And so that's why I'm here. And that's why we're in the business of taking risks. And the other day I spoke and said, the world needs to start, we need to get a little more, we're misperceiving risks. What's the risk of not doing something? I mean, the planet is burning up. So we're in the business of taking risks, convincing investors with this blended finance concept that they're protected. And ultimately, hopefully in 4, 5, 10 years, people start reevaluating whether they need blended finance or for which transactions. But I think the path laid out was pretty clear. I think, there's the things that need to be done: government approvals, adoption, validating the crop technology, getting, making sure the land. I mean, the things as Americans, we always worry about liability. There are no environmental liabilities and the like from the government and all that. And then arranging the debt financing that's part of it. But I mean, I think I'm very impressed with the amount of work that's been done with where you are today. So you need to put the coalition together. We can't do the government things ourselves. We can't get the power companies. We can't get the other industry players. And obviously pricing is a key to that. I mean, it's what are you going to pay, and how does that relate to the crops? And we need to know a lot more from the crop intelligence and as to what it will do and how it will work. But I think the path is, I think my fellow panelists know what needs to be done.
Great. Thank you very much, Craig. And that's really encouraging. Does anybody here in the room? I see a hand up. I'm going to come across to you. Magically, I don't need to come across to you. So please briefly say who you are and then ask your question.
Yeah,
make your comment.
Good afternoon. Michael Jenkins with Forest Trends. And I wanted to follow up on your comment there, Craig, because what I struggle with from the finance sector is, the traditional kinds of formulations you have about risk and all those kinds of things. And you've been following, you the finance sector have been following this for a long time. And I wonder how you calculate the risk of climate into the way you are operating, right? I mean, is it a instead of saying, yeah, we see the risk out there, but is that calculated into some of the ways you think about your investments? So taking greater risk, because if we don't do this, we're not going to have a planet in 10 years, right? So that how do you put that into your financial calculations?
We do factor that in. It's hard to put a specific number to it, but a presumption in everything we do is that is the case. Do I think the financial community as a whole does it? They're starting, but we're not close. It's hard to. We live in a world where, unfortunately, we look at quarterly earnings in the developed markets, and it's hard to calculate climate risk when you're thinking of quarterly earnings. So we do have a longer perspective, and with our models, both of having longer term capital, we do look at climate risk. It's very, I mean, again, if one wants to take, you don't only have so much control over climate risk. And in one sense, again, something Satya and I were talking about the other night, we can do everything right in this project, but if things around us are not happening correctly, I could argue the world's, literally going to burn up, and we can't quantify that. So to some extent, there's a limited amount of how we can calculate it just in our own projects, but we do look on a more narrow basis what could go wrong from a climate resilience standpoint and the like around the project. But your basic point is does the financial community suitably calculate risk? No, It's insane.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm looking at banks not investing in this area at all,
right,
despite the talk. So, I mean, not to be negative, but we need to, but the only way that I think is going to change apart from education is this idea of literally short-term profits. Short-term quarterly stock prices is insane.
Yeah. Just one quick follow-up, and I really wanted
could I just get Satya wanted to comment as
sure.
well, Michael, and then we could come back to you.
Thank you, Michael. The point is that I agree with you fully. So that's I'm not questioning what you said, but to look at risk through the matrix of the financial world, it's probability times impact. That's how they look at risk. Now, the impact is, of course, what would happen, and the probability is if it happens, and what is the likelihood of something happening. So we are at a time and place where the probability is now exponential. As you rightly said, we wouldn't have a planet in 7-10 years, not in the way we understand the planet. And so the challenge is not just in getting the financial world to wake up, and Craig clearly woke up decades ago, so he's not the right person to tell this to, but there are millions of investors out there who simply do not understand that everything is on a meltdown course, and that the money they have and the notes they think gets them all the good things in life is worth nothing. And only in a few years' time, we're not talking by the turn of the century anymore. So that's the challenge. And how do you wake up people that are in deep slumber? So I think that's where everybody here in this room and those listening in have a huge role to play in shaking up everybody that, we are on a crash course and we really need to wake up and do everything to stop that crash from happening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Michael,
great.
quick comment.
Just a quick comment. I wanted to congratulate the rest of the panelists in the project. We do a lot of work around the world also in what we call post-conflict and conflict nations. And what's really interesting to see is historically, natural resources have been a source of conflict. And what we're seeing now is the other side of that equation, where actual sustainable resource management, natural resource management, can be a way to kind of the healing that can happen. You can bring, people that have been fighting for a long time around a table to talk about water and soils and things like that. So I think this is this nature-based solutions has that additional powerful benefit of helping us move. And there are 50 countries around the world that are in conflict or post-conflict situations. So it's a very powerful instrument to invest in, with benefits that you can't measure economically, right?
Yeah. So I think that's a very astute comment, because Satya and I were at a conversation dealing with two unnamed nations who are facing each other across a border. And what is bringing them together is the complexity of managing natural resources sustainably. Because if they don't do it, then people will starve. So yeah, it's a very interesting comment. I'm just going to quickly, I'll give the panelists one last word each because you've earned it. You've done a great job today, but I just want to see whether in the room anybody else has a question or a comment to follow up, and then we'll go to, I think we'll go first to our very patient panelists online. As I don't see anybody raising a hand here. So Anis, would you like to make a last comment, having heard everything? And then Branko, I don't see Violetta online, so maybe she'll come back. But Anis, first to you, then to Branko, then we'll come back to the room.
Thank you very much. What I would also like to emphasize about this project is, and what is very important issue for this region, that this project of bioenergy crops actually goes perfectly in line with the just transition of coal regions. So we had not, we cannot forget miners in this region, and we need to provide some new greener jobs for those people. And that's exactly what we now plan to do with this project of plantation of energy crops on our coal mines, actually to employ a part of coal miners on these projects. And what I would also like to say is that it is not a deal about the sustainability of sourcing of the energy in this project. It is of the overall sustainability of this project, taking into account all aspects, social, environmental, climate, and finally, economically feasibility of these projects. And I think that it is very important, and there are not so many projects that fit actually to all those criteria.
Thank you very much, Anis. And I do want to echo, I think, what Bonnie said earlier, or may have been Lena, that it's really impressive to see power companies, mining companies stepping up to a green agenda. So thank you very much, and we look forward to continuing this successfully. Branko, please.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to add only one thing related to the subsidies. Namely, as I said, our ministry started to work new energy strategy. In the same time, we open discussion with the representatives of the Ministry of Energy related to some measures which can be included in the strategy. Also, we open discussion with the representative of the ministry related to the subsidies from the government side as one very important tool for establishing of the energy crops in the future in Serbia. Let's see. We hope that we will have the good results related to the new energy strategy and new measures for energy crops in Serbia. Thanks.
Thank you, Branko. That sounds very encouraging. So I'm going to go, because Lena was almost ready to say something. I'm going to start with Lena, then go to Chris, then so that you prepare your remarks, Craig, Bonnie, and then Satya to close off. And I'll get the last word because I have the bigger microphone. Lena, please.
I just wanted to comment on the previous, on the gentleman's words, when he said that it is bringing definitely reconciliation into the regions that were affected by the wars, because climate change is the single topic that nobody can argue about. And this will help the region. And this is another opportunity for the region. But also what I wanted to say as a last word is that we have investors, we have a good project, we have expertise, we have universities, professors to back it up, we have all these institutions. Now we have power companies, recipients, off-takers, and I think that it is time for the donors to align also in this way, in this direction, to relax a little bit investment from the financial institutions and to also help the project developers to connect the dots between now and investment. Thank you.
Thank you, Lena. Chris.
Yeah, thanks. It's funny, this discussion went a lot along the way I thought before I came to the COP. I thought, actually climate change is a technical problem that should be easy to address. We just need to do the right things, the right planning, the right finance, but the technical problem as such is not so difficult. We know the solutions. Where we always get hung up is on the social side, on the political side, on the egos. The 25 COPs are there not because the solutions are not clear, but because people cannot agree on what to do and how much to invest and where to do it first and so on. And I think we are seeing here two things aligned well. First, we're seeing political buy-in in the countries in the region. As I tried to show on my last slide, we had these people from the power companies there, and they're supporting this, and we had the contribution from Anes and his colleagues here in the panel. But also we have, and that is actually also showing there is a buy-in from the people on the ground. And I wouldn't be here if the strongest argument in favor of this wouldn't come from people like Lena or people from the region saying, we want to do this. We see this is bringing us forward. And I think that is important here.
Thank you, Chris.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to, I've just been told that we're going to finish bang on time, and I think we can. Craig, for your quick comments, Bonnie.
I'd say this is so clearly a win-win. We need examples like this. I mean, to again, move things forward. This is a win. There are 10 wins here when you look at the different elements, including on the worker side, on the reconciliation side. And examples like this will encourage, I believe, more folks to invest. We need to prove it, invest quickly in these projects, and then dramatically scale up.
Thank you. Bonnie, for your quick comment.
We're in a race against the clock, and we all feel it. We're environmentalists as well as business people, and this is nature positive, it's people positive, but most importantly, it's finance positive. The long-term, you can't even get long-term offtake agreements for forest wood in Serbia, and it's a huge part of the culture and the business environment. Here we can provide it 20% cheaper than even the short-term offtake, and that gives a nice gap to accommodate those risks you're worried about. So let's talk.
Great.
Thank you. Satya.
Well, I think I'm completely bowled over by all the positive statements being made here today. And as Bonnie pointed out, this has been a conversation 3 years in the making. And I sincerely hope that we get to the end of it, get the investment done, and produce a brilliant example for the rest of the world that the international community getting invested in just a peacemaking process is not good enough. Peace building is equally important. Bringing people together, there's a better way other than just peacemaking. Thank you.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen. So I did say I would get the last word, but there's very little I can say to top what we've heard from everybody here, except to say this has been truly, and I promised you this, energetic. So I think I leave here with a sense that if we have more programs and projects like this one, we can really get tangible progress. I was listening to Craig talking about how easy it was to invest in solar and thinking back to 20 years when nobody wanted to do that. I don't think we have 20 years. I think, Bonnie, you're right. We may not even have 20 months. So I think the team needs to get their skates on. So I'm glad that Branko and Anis are online. So let's all work and let's see, early next year, whether we can put something in front of the global community and get this going. To all of you in the room, thank you very much. to my colleagues from Resilient Landscapes who helped to put this together, and all of you here, thank you very much. Please enjoy the rest of GLA.